A community needs a certain kind of place, somewhere natural, where memories can be formed and frozen in time, waiting for their respective owners to return to experience them again. A place invulnerable to the marching of time. During my high school summers, on every Wednesday at 6:30 a.m., I'd spend my morning at Harmony Hill Park in Westchester, PA, training with my teammates for cross country. It was a part of my routine. I'd wake to a red sunrise blasting through my window and slink out of bed. Shivering, I'd put on my running clothes before trudging out to my car. The summer mornings were always frigid, since the sun was just peeking out as practice began. We'd all huddle around our coach, yawning with our arms tightly crossed against the cold, and he'd give us our run for the day, usually between 4 and 8 miles. They all began with this immediate pitch downwards, and we'd barrel down the path, dodging wasp nests hidden in tree branches and avoiding the clutches of gnarled roots jutting out of the ground. Each trail would twist its way down to the asphalt path at the bottom, and by the time you got there, those yawns were long gone. These morning runs are entrenched in the memory of a generation of trail runners now, inexorably connected to this place. And for all the hundreds of mountain bikers and hikers that frequent these trails, the same is true. If it weren't for this place, those memories would have no chance of existing. The Harmony Hill Nature Area was purchased in 2005 by the East Bradford Township. In the 14 years since, it's been expanded to over 240 acres with over 7 miles of trails. Before all this could come to fruition, however, the property was owned by a man called Grover Bergdahl. All that is left of his era are ruins. To explain further, I interviewed the Parks and Rec Director for East Bradford, Rich Pfeiffer.
So can you just go over the Bergdahl stuff again?
Yeah, sure. The Bergdahl estate is on the Hogs Hollow property. What I know of that is it dates back to the Bergdahl family, which is like World War I into the 1920s and 30s. Mr. Bergdahl, the former owner, was a pretty wealthy individual, and he essentially was drafted but dodged the draft, escaped out of the country, and many years later he had returned to the country and spent some time in prison, was eventually released, and he may have lived back on the property for a short time with his family, but he and his family were the last known inhabitants of that house, which is now ruins. After his ownership, it kind of was never actively lived in again.
Given that Rich had such a deep knowledge of the park's history, I wanted to hear his relationship to the park and any stories that might come out of that.
How would you describe your personal use and relationship to the park?
I, in particular, because of my job duties, spend most of my time at the park doing stewardship of the property, kind of maintaining the natural resources and the trail system. And so my connection with the park from a personal perspective is more in that line as opposed to a recreational user.
You said that thing about the sycamore trees. That was actually really cool.
All right, so yeah, with the sycamores, what's really cool is that there's a picture that was taken probably sometime in the 1930s that shows the house, which is long since burnt down. But out in front of the house, in that photograph, you could see 2 sycamore trees that it looks like during the time of the photograph, they may have been about, say, maybe 30 or so years old. So now it's probably 130-ish years old. You know, they still are both standing, healthy, vibrant. What I had noticed a few years ago after I started working for the township and spending some time on the property is that they had been overgrown by these big, thick, and heavy English ivy vines reaching pretty much the canopy level of the trees. So what I thought that if someone didn't cut them down, eventually they'd weigh the tree down and make it prone to either being blown over in a windstorm, or they would just crowd out the canopy and strangle the tree from getting sunlight and kill it. So ever since I did that, it's really been a big difference in terms of the trees. The crowns look healthier. The weight alone of all the vines, which now being gone and dead and dried up, just I think really unburden the trees. And we'll see. You never know how long they're going to survive, but as long as they're there, I think it's really cool because they're kind of like 2 living witnesses to history almost.
two living witnesses to history. My connection to the park is one of recreation, but Rich's is a preservation. And by the way he talked about those trees like they were truly alive, shows that the park can host many different kinds of experiences to many different kinds of people. To get another account, I interviewed my friend Steven on his time at the park, and one story stuck out in particular to me. To preface this, I'll explain the section of the park that he was in. It was a bridge stretching over the valley and the Brandywine River, and it was built around the turn of the 20th century. In the 70s, it was abandoned when the paper mill here went bust. Since then, it's become the home of the more adventurous park goers. Decades of graffiti are scrawled on the concrete wall blocking off the bridge, each layer holding the memory of another generation of teenage disobedience. Now that the scene is set, here's Steven. So Steve, could you tell me a little bit more about that Trestle Bridge time?
Yeah, it was, I'd say, the beginning of summer this past year. Me and a few friends just went out to dinner beforehand, and we were like, let's go up to the bridge, smoke a cigar, talk for a little while. So we went there, watched the sunset, just talked about funny things that had happened. We were all going to different schools, so talked about our futures and stuff. It was a good night with some great friends.
This was a last reunion before college, clearly an important moment when looking back. The bridge serves as a reminder of that memory, just like the trails do to all my summer spent training. There's one more memory that I want to include to illustrate the true beauty of the park. It was towards the beginning of the past winter, as we readied for a long season of indoor track. We had a day off from school, and the forecast was predicting some light snow. I needed to get in about 7 miles, so I headed to the closest trails, which happened to be Harmony Hill Nature Area. The snow started coming down as I pulled into the parking lot. I got going on the Hogs Hollow Trail, a 2-mile loop across the road from the rest of the park. And as I started, the snow started coming down harder and harder. The hair peeking out from my beanie captured those falling flakes, and I had to squint my eyes beneath them to keep going. I started noticing my footprints in the snow would be gone as I came around for another lap. Once the snow started to pile up to the top of my shoe, I figured I'd finish up the lap and head home. However, as I was coming around the final bend before the end, the valley to my right caught my eye. I could see all the way across the valley, and the view was stunning. The snow meandered down between the trees in all 360 degrees of my vision. My stride closed down to a walk, and I slowed to a stop. I stood there awestruck, with steam billowing off my neck and snow building on my shoulders. For me, this tranquil moment is frozen in my memory. It's the first thought that goes to my head when I think about the park. For Rich, his special memory was one of stewardship. For Steven, it was a final night of camaraderie with his friends before their paths diverged. These kinds of experiences are what gives a community value, and the park acts as a kind of time capsule, holding those memories safe for their owners. As Rich put it, a living witness to history.